Internal Revenue Service IRS Tax News. IRS.gov helps taxpayers get information they need, find tools for filing, paying, checking accounts, and answering questions. IR 2020-99, May 21st, 2020, Washington. The Internal Revenue Service reminds taxpayers today about several online tools. There's a link to those tools here. There'll be a link to this in the description. Back to the text. Available to help them get the tax information they need as the IRS has limited operations due to the coronavirus. More taxpayers are using IRS.gov than ever before. As of May 8th, the agency website had been visited a record 1 billion times, up 141% compared to the same time last year. So the basic push here is to say, hey, look, due to the coronavirus, there's going to be less type of services, and that's partially due to the social distancing for the coronavirus. So they're trying to get people to be using. They've been updating their tools more on the IRS website for the current events related to the coronavirus, as well as just general information pushing towards the having the stuff on their website. Back to the text. The tools on IRS.gov are easy to use and available 24 hours a day. Millions of taxpayers use them to help file and pay taxes, find information about their accounts, and get answers to tax questions. Take advantage of Free File products. So this is the Free File products IRS on the IRS website. The IRS Free File program, there's a link to that here, available only through IRS.gov, offers 70% of all taxpayers the choice of 10 brand name tax preparation software packages to use at no cost. The software does all the work of filing deductions, credits, and exemptions for which the taxpayer qualifies. It's free for those who earned $69,000 or less in 2019. So if you earn $69,000 or less, you might want to look into the IRS Free File program to help to file your tax return in an electronic way using software, which is really nice, and in a free, which is really nice. Back to the text. Some of the Free File packages also offer free state tax return preparations. That's often one of the big problems here, because obviously when you file the taxes, you've got the IRS side of things, the federal side of things. You would think normally when you go to the IRS website, they're talking about just basically the IRS side of things, the Fed. The Fed doesn't talk to the state that much. They do, when they're doing collections and whatnot, but they're different things, clearly. So when you file your tax return, you got to think, okay, how am I going to do the Fed tax return if I'm using software to help me file the Fed tax return, the 1040? Does that software also allow me to file the state return if I'm required to file a state return, depending on the state that you're in? So whenever you look at different ways that you can file the tax return, make it easy on yourself. If you have a state tax return, then it's best generally to use the software that's going to be filing both the Fed and the state at the same time, hopefully. And many of these tools they're getting better at it on the IRS website to get the tools that will be applicable to the states. The reason the states are more difficult, of course, is because they're not standardized across the whole country. So states having different states with different tax laws means the software has to be more complex to accommodate the different types of tax laws for each of the states. Back to the text. Any taxpayer, regardless of income, who is comfortable preparing their own taxes can use Free File fillable forms. There's a link to that here. Taxpayers also use this electronic version of paper IRS tax forms to file tax returns online. The IRS automatically extends the federal income tax filing due date from April 15th, 2020 to July 15th, 2020. So that's nice. We have that extension, typically April 15th, now July 15th, 2020. Individual taxpayers who need more time to file their income tax returns beyond the July 15th deadline can use IRS Free File to electronically request an automatic tax filing extension. So then you can request an extension from the current time when the tax returns are due, which is now July 15th, and you can go to the IRS website to do so. Back to the text. This gives the taxpayers until October 15th to file their tax return. To get the extension, the taxpayer must estimate their tax liability and pay any amount due. So just remember, as usual, filing an extension will help to remove any penalties for late filing, or reduce at least penalties, for filing late. That's really what you're doing with the extension. What you're not doing is extending the time that you need to make the payment. In other words, if you owed taxes, the IRS is still going to treat you as having owed the taxes and charge you basically penalties and interest possibly on the taxes that were due. So if you file the extension, you think you're going to owe money, then you still should be paying them if you want to remove, the interest and the penalties on that. And then by filing the extension, you should remove the penalties related to the late filing penalties. Back to the text. Choose from a variety of payment options. Taxpayers should visit the Pay, there's a link to that here, tab on IRS.gov. See their payment options. Most tax software products give taxpayers various payment options, including the option to withdraw the funds from a bank account. So, in other words, how are you going to pay if you owe the IRS, how are you going to pay the IRS what is due, whether that be through the extension that you're filing or the tax return. And clearly the IRS is going more and more towards, the electronic payments. So you can send them a check, but they're trying to get the payments to be going both ways, both the refunds and now the payments to them to be electronic, because that's going to be typically an easier thing for them. So back to the text. This includes Irs Direct Pay, there's a link to that here, offers taxpayers a free, fast, secure, and easy way to make an electronic payment from their bank account to the U.S. Treasury. Use an approved payment processor to pay by credit, debit, or digital wallet options for a fee. Make monthly or quarterly tax payments using IRS Direct Pay. There's a link to that here. Or through the electronic federal tax payment system. There's a link to that here. Pay by cash at a participating retail store. Last month, the IRS also announced that taxpayers generally have until July 15, 2020 to pay federal income taxes originally due on April 15th. So they've extended that. That's nice. Back to the text. No late filing penalty, late payment penalty, or interest will be due. That's nice. This includes estimated tax payments normally due April 15th and June 15th, which are now extended to July 15th, 2020. View tax account information online. To see their tax account, taxpayers can use the View Your Account tool. There's a link to that here. They'll find information such as a payoff amount, the balance for each tax year owed, up to 24 months of their payment history, and key information from their current tax year return as originally filed. Taxpayers can use the Get Transcript, link to that here, tool to view, print, or download their tax transcripts after the IRS has processed the return. Taxpayers will notice a delay in the processing of their Forms 4506, request for copy of tax return, because the closed IRS office due to COVID-19. So in other words, they're going to have trouble processing that because that's something they got to do basically in the office, and because of social distancing, they're outside of the office. It's not something that will be electronic, therefore it could take longer. Back to the text. Tax return transcripts show most line items from an original tax return, along with any forms and schedules, but not any changes made after the taxpayer filed it. The tool is free and available on IRS.gov. Ordering a tax transcript will not speed up taxpayers' refund or provide an updated refund date. Taxpayers can easily find the most up-to-date information about their tax refund using the Where's My Refund? There's a link to that tool here. Tool on IRS.gov and on the official IRS mobile app. There's a link to that here, IRS2Go app. IRS2Go, very catchy. Back to the text. Within 24 hours after the IRS acknowledges receipt of an e-file return, taxpayers can start checking on the status of their refund. Taxpayers should be aware that the IRS isn't currently processing paper tax returns due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So once again, they're trying to move away from the mail-in here. So if you're filing a paper tax return, you can do that, but it's going to take them longer to process that. And their justification for that is that, they don't have as many people there. So the electronic things are things they can do outside of the office. And because of social distancing, they're doing that. So they're trying to push everything towards the online if you want to speed up the process. If you don't want to speed up the process, if you want things to go slow for some reason, which could, there could be, then paper filing might be the way to go then. Back to the text. Get answers to tax questions and economic impact payments. Taxpayers may find answers to many of their questions using the Interactive Tax Assistance (ITA), a tax law resource that works using a series of questions and provides responses. IRS.gov has answers to frequently asked questions. Link to that here. The IRS website has tax information in Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Russian, Vietnamese, Haitian, and there's links to those items here. For questions concerning economic impact payments, visit Economic Impact Payments. There's a link to that here. Section of the IRS.gov. Taxpayers will find 2 tools there to help them get their payments. Get My Payment. There's a link to Get My Payment tool, and Non-Filers Enter Payment Info tool. There's a link to that as well. Both tools are available in English and Spanish. Taxpayers should use Get My Payment to check payment status, confirm payment type, and enter bank account information for direct deposit if the IRS doesn't have that information and hasn't sent payment yet. Those who don't normally file taxes must use non-filers enter payment info here to provide simple information so they can get their payment. People who receive Social Security, retirement, or disability benefits, SSDI, supplemental security income, SSI, railroad retirement benefits, and VA compensation, and pension, C&P benefits, don't use the non-filers enter payment info here tool to receive their economic impact payment. In other words, they don't need to use that tool because even though they're not filing, because the IRS knows about them, because they're working with these other types of payment institutions from the government, so you shouldn't generally need the tool, even though you're not filing a tax return in that case. Back to the text. The IRS already has this information, and those who receive these benefits will automatically receive $1,200. But for those who receive benefits in these groups and have a qualifying child, they may be eligible for an additional $500 per child. However, their payment will be $1,200, and by law, the IRS would pay the additional $500 per eligible child amount in association with a return filing for tax year 2020. So in other words, the IRS is going to take whatever information they have. If all they have is they know that someone's getting payments and they didn't file a tax return and they're getting payments, the IRS assumes that their taxable income is under the threshold. Therefore, they should receive the full economic impact payment for an individual tax filer. And they're going to send that out. If there's any other information, such as a child, they don't know about it, and therefore they're not going to include that. And to get that at this point, if the payment has already gone out at this point, then they're going to kind of fix this when you file the 2020 return. And you might say, but I don't file returns in that case because I don't file tax returns. Well, if you're missing the $500 and we didn't use the tools to get the extra $500 per a qualifying child, then at this point in time, to get it, you would actually have to file the tax return for 2020 to put the qualifying child on the tax return. The IRS is basically saying, hey, look, I'm going to, send out what we can at this point in time, and then we're going to make any adjustments, any fixes, any added payments that need to be made with the filing of the 2020 tax return. So if there's an error and you don't usually file a tax return, then the current remedy for that is to actually file the tax return for 2020, even if it's just an information return, to give them that information with regards to, for example, the $500 per eligible child if that has not yet been received. Back to the text. For more information on the payments, see Economic Impact Payment, Frequently Asked Questions, FAQs, and see our Get My Payment, Frequently Asked Questions, FAQs as well for more information about this tool. And there's links to those items here. Watch out for scams related to economic impact payments. So obviously a lot of money going out here. The IRS is just sending money out, and that means that the normal scam will go up. There's going to be more scams related to this. Also, it's a one-time thing that we haven't seen before, so people are not used to it, which is another thing I would think that scammers would kind of like. They might also put pressure on people saying that, hey, look, there's a time constraint. So anytime someone says there's a time constraint, you got to give us this information now, we need it by tomorrow, then I would be suspicious. And the general rules, you always want to go back to the IRS website and go to the source, even though it will take a little bit longer. Anytime you get any kind of phishing thing or something that looks like it could be a phishing-related item. Back to the text. The IRS urges taxpayers to be on the lookout for scams related to economic impact payments. To use the new app or get information, taxpayers should visit IRS.gov. People should watch out for scams using email, phone calls, or text related to payments. Be careful and cautious. The IRS will not send unsolicited electronic communication, ask people to open attachments, visit a website, or share personal or financial information. So again, the normal thing that people would do is send an email and say, hey, look, we need this information quickly, or hey, look, would you visit this website? You need to check this out right now and take a look at that, or would you download this item? The IRS won't do those things because those are scammy related things. If you haven't something that looks legitimate, that you think looks legitimate, then you want to go to the IRS directly. Back to the text. Remember, go directly and solely to IRS.gov for official information. The IRS is regularly updating economic impact payment and get my payment applications frequently asked questions page on the IRS.gov website. Check IRS.gov/coronavirus, link to that here, often for the latest editions that answer many common questions.